Hello, thank you for coming today in spite of the very hot weather. And we are having a conversation between Ukhona Ntsali Mlandu and Alessandra Pomarico. And Ukhona is a founder and head curator of Makwan Republic residency in rural Eastern Cape in South Africa. She is also director of Great More Studio, which is an artist-run community. And she is also a performance artist. And she has been active on the African continent and also internationally. And Alessandra Pomarico, she is an independent curator, writer, and educator. And among many things, she is a member of Ecoversities Alliance, which is dedicated to reimagining higher education. And importantly, she is co-founder of Free Home University in Lecce, an artistic and pedagogical experiment focused on creating knowledge by experiencing life in common. And the fact that they are today here together is it's a happy coincidence because they happen both to be in Bratislava, and we thought that it would be interesting to open up a discussion between them and have two perspectives on from the South, different South, on curatorial and artistic practice, education, also institutional system, and also the political system affecting artistic life. So I am welcoming you to start your conversation, and then the public is encouraged to put questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Judith, so much, and thank you, everyone at Transit, to make this possible. For me, it's a little bit, as I was sharing earlier, coming back home, because just 1 year ago, we were working together here with an exhibition and a public program that was called Grounding, Seeding, Grounding, and vice versa. And that was a process that we were exploring this idea of how it is to decolonize the methods, the approach, the institution when it comes to curating, when it comes to put together public program, what is needed these days, and how can we open up to other cosmovisions, other cosmologies, and also as we work in Europe and in the context, in our context, how to do this practically through our practice. And is it enough to just invite other voices, or how can we also, in the way we organize, somehow disrupt certain habits, certain systems, as we were speaking earlier. So for me, it's a joy to be back here, and it's a joy to meet you, Ukhona. When I heard about what you do and how you do and what you prioritize in your practice, I felt immediately aligned and curious to get to know you. So for all of you to know, this is really a sort of improvised conversation. We didn't organize much. We want to be really following a conversational mode, and we will show some pictures that are also randomly put together about our work. We will not comment them, right? The first one is the batch that Ukhona brought, and secondly, you will see a little more about Free Home University projects. And yes, you are invited to interject, pose questions if something in what we are discussing invites you to intervene, or you can do that at the end. please be with us in this, in this conversation, and thank you for being here.
Yeah, it's really, it's beautiful how it's come together, that we're here. And I think it speaks very much to the direction that I hope my work, or that I see my work taking, in terms of being responsive to the needs of the moment, in terms of trusting process, in terms of beginning to reject ways of working that don't seem instinctive, and to, because right now I'm really thinking through imagining alternative ways of working, because I've worked in the creative sector for the last, close to 21 years. And I've kind of seen my way through different things. And I know that now, for where I am, having gone through different ways and modes of working, I know that I'm drawn to a way of working that is a lot more embodied, that is a lot more courageous, that is an invitation, that thinks in questions rather than pretending to have preconceived ideas of what things should look like. And so I'm really exploring that freedom and trusting that it's going to carry me and sustain me, because I've done the opposite. And while externally it looked like I was succeeding at something, there were certain parts of me that needed to die in order for that something else to exist. And one of the things for me that is very key is the slowness that I've introduced into the way that I work. All my professional life, I've been based in Cape Town. It's a very known city for, cutting edge, artistic, whatever. And I'd cut my niche people there as an arts manager and as an artist. But I also knew that it felt like I was working against myself. Cape Town is a very racialized city. And so in order to have gained the kind of traction, respect, entry into spaces that I have, it meant taking on a combative nature, which some people would love to believe is my first nature, because everybody loves the stereotype of the strong Black African woman. But actually, that's not my actual nature. My nature is that I'm slow, I'm deliberate. I like things to be soft. I like things to feel collaborative. I like to be held. And everything that I've had to be that is combative was because I was responding to the environment. It was me fighting for myself, fighting to exist in a space that wouldn't have made space for me otherwise. Yeah.
Yes, this made me think about what is often discussed also among curators, artists, and those who work in institutions, all scale of institutions. Often we speak about institutional violence, especially when we work within formal structures, whether university, museum, NGOs, organization. But what it is exactly, and it's rarely discussed. And what you were saying of this sacrifice, self-sacrifice, that to sort of produce in a certain way, in a certain time, following the rules of the production and so on. What does it make of the work we do? That we may reclaim is decolonial, we may reclaim is imbued with critical thinking. In reality, often we are bounded to continue work in that way and to reproduce those systems of violence, even against ourselves. So I really resonate with the necessity at one point, it happened to me too in the various space I traversed, that at one point I had to be deliberate as to use the word you used about drawing the line and putting a boundary and knowing when to say no to certain things, even at the cost of maybe less visibility, embracing the margin, both if you want geographically, because I come from the south of Italy, or a small town that is not certainly in the center of the art world, although I'm also based in New York. But embracing the margin as a space of freedom, as a space of experimenting different modes of production, even within the artistic community that is per se quite transnational, quite and needing different spaces. So the way I did that in my practice was really, and I know I'm bringing this up because with the short conversation we had just before coming here, the way I tried to build that environment was to start from my home, which with all the difficulty that could be easily imagined, not having an institution behind us, not having funds, having to start from everything, but gave the amazing freedom of really experimenting with the rhythm and the process we felt necessary to really embody this idea of also creating at different ways, creating these other ways that we need. And I know you recently came back home to do that as well.
And this would be like my second iteration of like leaving Cape Town and going to this village that nobody's ever heard about, and hoping that somehow I'm going to be able to continue to be able to feed my children. You know, most people, even the first time around, they were like, it's suicidal, you know? The first time around, of course, people who know of my work, they gravitated towards it. Certain things happened, but those things weren't able to put food on my table. So I struggled. And then I got offered this job with this residency in Cape Town, Greatmore Studios. 32 years in existence, formed during the heart of apartheid. Is kind of like this interesting artist-led community of practice. A lot of things, interesting things are happening racially where, you know, races that are by law not supposed to mix, but they're mixing in the name of art. So it enjoys this, this prestigious and important history in South Africa. They approached me to be the director and to apply for the directorship because they've seen this thing that I've made happen in this village that they've never heard of. So the periphery that I'm sitting in is able to signal something to something that was at first quite periphery itself, but now has moved towards the center because all the collectors look to this place as a campus of what is new and emerging, not just from South Africa, but from the continent. So this place has become a rite of passage. I repeat again, at some point it was a periphery, it was quite a transgressive space. Now it is, but it has somehow become the campus. Co-opted. I get into the directorship and there were weird things happening even leading up to my appointment. I get into the directorship and I'm confronted by the extent to which this institution has constructively created situations where, first of all, Black women cannot exist and last in this place. So there's constantly manufactured chaos. There is somebody who's written themselves into history as the founder, who has no concept that this organization can exist outside of their tutelage. Thirdly, the internal organizational culture is such that the art and the artist has moved further and further away from the main agenda. You have administrators who have no background in the art speaking about artists as if they are presiding over them with benevolence. Then also another question, there's the acceptance that because of passport apartheid, because of economic privilege, the space now has become predominantly the playground for European leisure artists, and the voice of the African artist is getting eroded. And so I walk into this thing and I'm expected to lead it. I've never been so traumatized and violated in my entire existence. Because the assaults, the manufactured chaos, the expectation that I needed to perform myself and my legitimacy in the role, even with the kind of background that I have, was just beyond ridiculous. And so I had to make a choice in order to save myself and to kind of stay focused, to go, I'm tapping out of this idea that like, I have to maintain this thing as it is, because even the way that it's designed, it's not meant for me to survive it. What else can I imagine?
Unless you reproduce it in the way it works.
And so I kind of had to take on an anarchist worldview of going, what's the priority here? And for me, because I'm also an artist, the artist became the priority. The approval of philanthropists who thought I should answer to them, and they punished me, they took away their money. Pandering to gallerists, pandering to art fairs was not to be my priority, because by virtue of being a residency, I think the most important thing was to protect the integrity of the artistic process. And so I kind of went, here's what I'm gonna do. And so that process of rebuilding the trust and the confidence of the artist to understand that a residency becomes a residency because there are artists moving through the space. In the absence of that, it's just a building. Mm-hmm. I'm certainly not trying to be a gallery. I mean, I could go on and so forth, but where it sits now, if you ask somebody else, and I'm glad this is recorded, if you ask somebody else about Ukhona Ntsali Mlandu as the director of Great Mall, some people will say, dismal failure, don't go anywhere near her, she ruined that organization. The artists who are at Great Mall now, I'm not saying that they were always gonna be who they are, but by virtue of the environment that we created, where we leaned into an ethic of care, an artist-led community of practice. They work in such ways that they've developed relationships amongst themselves, a sense of ownership of the space, that you can see how their material conditions have changed. And they are leading this process. I'm not somebody who is, I can't claim to have made them. But the system that existed before, it had those tendencies. And yeah, I don't even know what I mean, I don't think you're asking me questions. We're having a conversation here, but I don't know if how you have dealt with this idea of the benchmarks that are set to measure our work versus what feels instinctual to you. And I think you've alluded to this, but I'd love to hear like how you navigate this idea of.
Yes, navigating is the good term, I think, because it's In my case, I also realize we can never completely exist outside of the system, although I also withdrew from the system, like from university first and from institution of art later on, just because I also felt, I don't know, just simply life is short, and the energy you put in trying to change the institution from within, especially as a woman from the South or from the margin, and the type of violence that I felt, I didn't have the stamina to face that. And I didn't want to have that as my goal, just for the sake of changing the university. I had quite early on decided to see what it is to build something completely alternative. Of course, we cannot yet exist, I don't think, as a society, although through this journey I met a lot of people, allies, comrades, experimental persons, or visionaries that also share this idea of reimagining our art world, our education. But those alternatives are never sustainable in the long run, right? So this navigation is like, for me, is being how to be in and out of those systems, how to incur the time I need to be able to exit when I also need. And for me, one concern is always that I've become a little more attuned now, because I'm normally a bit naive in believing that what we say is maybe what we really want to build. I understood this mechanism of cooptation that you mentioned, that institutions really crave these radical alternatives, these artistic reimaginings. But as soon as you let institutions take that, whether at the beginning feels they are opening up space to you, then that there is a high danger in there, because this co-opting change what you are trying to offering. And I've seen this whether, when I've been invited as someone who has some experience in this sort of radical pedagogies, or when I'm invited as a feminist, or whether I'm invited because I have worked with migrants and displaced subjects. But as soon as an institution somehow wants to take these notions in this disembodied way, just because it may be what's need to be discussed right now, what's hot in the system, in the art world, then they empty what it really means. So for me, it's been also, okay, you invite me to speak about the work I've done with the migrant, already with this labeling of people, then I cannot come alone. You have to pay for someone that has co-informed, because it was not my project. It's always, in the way we work, projects that are co-informed, co-created, is collectively put together. So for me, it's been, okay, I need to leverage and I need to open up space. So I'm not the only one invited to speak about those experiences, but other people should come along. Or, as we were discussing, you're intrigued or interested in my feminist approach to the work, then the institution has to support women. You accept to work with institutions that in the practice support women. So you have to consider, I'm leaving my daughter home, with whom I should be leaving her, or if we involve women artists, what's their family, what we are putting them to be participating in our artistic institution and work, what are we putting, what's the other price they're paying.
Right.
So
The invisible price.
the invisible work and labor and price.
Right.
Or we invite, we want to do with displaced women and they want to be, we organize an assembly with them. We need to pay for someone that is with their children outside of the room, or we need to pay for food for everyone because they come with their whole extended family, and so on. So for me, the work that is often not seen within an institutional frame is to negotiate this aspect in which you are not only using what we have built in another context with this attention to care, creating and respecting the ecologies of care of a community, of a system, or mutuality, reciprocity, and as much as possible take that in the institution framework.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. But also on this notion of care and this idea of kind of the natural inclination and attraction to individuals who work in ways that seem to be, stretching the margins or the boundaries, and this idea of co-option is the extent to which, in my lived experience, I have experienced people marvel at what it is that I do and how it is that they perceive me to do it without ever taking an interest in the details of it, because maybe they consumed with their lives, but also taking an interest in my well-being as I do this work. So you get tagged as somebody who's able to move things, push things. Suddenly, people don't have a conception of you as a human being who these things that you are navigating are actually having an effect on you. The embodied feeling of dealing with institutional violence, the effects it has on your family life, the effects that it has. Like today, I've learned that I lost someone who became like a mother to me when I lost my mother. But in the 2 years that I was navigating this institutional craziness, I lost contact with them because I had no space for those kind of relationships. So I lost contact with them in the last 2 years. They've meant a lot to me. They've meant a lot to my children. Last night, I learned that I have no room to repair and fix this relationship in this realm anymore. And I remember my last conversation with Unomzi, and yeah, this one is actually dedicated to Unomzi Matrose, where I said to her, it's not that I don't want you in my life, it's just that I don't have the space. This thing is consuming me so much. So that's the one, like how do we begin to unpack what it means to introduce an ethic of care into the way that I work and into the way that we work, but also this ability to see each other in our fullness, not just the aspects of each other that we can commercialize, that we can extract, that we can suck on, but all of the aspects of a human being. And this question of mothering while being a creative, while being an artist is also something quite close to me because, again, like I said, I lost my mother. I buried my mother when my son turned 1. So I've raised my children without a mother, and it's a particular experience. Those of you who've experienced it. But I've worked in a sector that is supposed to be groundbreaking and irreverent and pushing boundaries, but the question of how to accommodate families, parenting, mothering within the sector there's an unspoken agreement that just don't make it inconvenient for everyone. Otherwise, the sector won't take you seriously. Figure out what you do with all of that. Come to us ready to be the thing that we want to consume. We're not interested in the full spectrumness of who you are. But speaking of spectrum, you know, when you were talking, Alessandra, about this idea of imagination and power, I've kind of been thinking through and toying with this idea that power is neutral, and it can be used anywhere on the spectrum. So power in and of itself is a neutral kind of energy force. But it's these tendencies of a subjugating kind of power that always points us back to this problem that you say, where institutions will love the idea of somebody who is challenging their thinking, because they kind of think that they'd love to stretch themselves. But institutions, by their very nature, they tend to flirt with the idea of a more subjugating kind of iteration of power. Put my name on the logo, wave my flag. So, and the needs of the institution always supersede the needs of the individual. So the institution will say, this is our policy. And my question to the institution, for me, I always go, but my policy is the opposite of that. So what do we do with this? And often that question, what I'm saying there is that, look me in the eye and tell me, because you are an institution, you have the right to superimpose your policy over mine. And then I'm going to call you the bully that you are. And I'm going to go, so how do we move from here? How do we create an alternative where we meet each other somewhere? Yeah,
it's what we've been calling para-institutions, often artists or friends or comrades, because this is also what we do. There is a whole universe, a whole ecosystem of also para-institutions, which are those constituencies that come together around another set of values that have been probably rejected or have escaped the institution that exists, and trying to imagine what is not here yet. This projection to what it could be if we reimagine our institutions, and we do it starting from what we are lacking and exercising ourselves in what other forms, what are the ways in which we need for power to circulate in a more horizontal way and disrupt the hierarchy of the institutions that we know, the business as we know it, in which ways we can correct somehow the existing asymmetry of power, so in which way we can avoid that to happen. And of course, it's a very hard task, because even if you have political, theoretical, grounded knowledge about all the theories that exist criticizing the systems, but the reality is that we have been socialized with these institutions. So there is a lot that get also internalized. And we carry this bias, we carry those habits. So in our experience of Free Home University was exactly an experiment in that, what it takes to build a protected space. That's why it's called a home, and it started in my home, because these are processes that are also in which our vulnerabilities and the difficulties that we have to let go with the sweet habits that institutional power or institutional ways of being have created in and around us, they're not so easy to let go with. We may think or we may wish or we aspire to overcome, reformulate, reform, but it's not so easy because we are.
So which brings me to something that we spoke about when we met earlier. I mean, we're speaking about it in relation to grief, because I shared the grief because I needed Alessandra to know where I'm located emotionally. And she shared as well that she comes into this carrying some sort of grief. I mean, a lot of feelings can exist. We all know in one human being. I'm also excited to be here. I'm also loving Bratislava. But the grief was the most urgent one at the time that I needed to get out. And I then spoke about the fact that right now, one of the hardest things for me about this particular grief is the fact that I can't make arrangements to go and be at this woman's house in ways that my community congregates around grief. And I shared with Alessandra that I was talking to a friend, and I mean, she shared similarities in her own culture, but I was speaking from an African perspective about the ways in which there is a container for grief that is quite seamless in a lot of ways in my context. And because from the time that it is announced that somebody has died, there's certain things that start moving within the community. Like in a context of a village, on a Wednesday, the young men go and dig the grave. They finish it off on a Friday, so in case there was any rain in between. The peeling of the vegetables happen on a Friday, anytime between 12 and you bring your own knife, you bring your own bowl. There's food that must happen. Like there's things that happen. You, the grieving, like you're not expected to know anything except, in fact, people are going, have you eaten? I share this to say, I'm experiencing this now as somebody who's been socialized in the world. I grew up in this context. This thing is like breathing to me. Then I came and became of the world. And it's taken a particular intentionality, and it's intuitive, but it's counterintuitive all at once. Because now I come from a culture where you must call to say you're coming. But I share that to say that there are communities and there are ways of being that have existed before all of this, where these things were a lot more circular and fluid and gentle and intuitive. So there are other instincts that exist within us, or there are other societies that have things to teach. Mm-hmm. There's a co-learning, which is why mobility is one of my big things. The ability to engage with others and learn the certain things that I've learned here in this short space of time that I'm going to take with me home. Yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this, but I'm making a case for this idea that yes, there's the system that we all agree is no longer sufficient for our needs. We want something else. And that something else is a combination of what has already been, the learnings from what has worked and doesn't work now, the keeping of some of what works, and the imagining of alternatives from that combination. So for me, it's not a linear, it's a very windy road of and an openness and an invitation and a series of questions, a playfulness, a fluidity, rather than going, I've developed the model. No, I don't think we can do that anymore. I don't think, like, we hold on to the illusion that we can, but I don't think it's possible. The world is changing too fast. We're exposed to too many things. The variables are changing all the time. It's not wise for us to be so. I think life is teaching us that something else is required.
Yes, something that seems to be in what you're sharing, a kind of old ways that have to be brought back into our presence, and is not, as you say, a linear trajectory. It's more like this inquiry in what can help us deal also with the catastrophe that is happening personally, as people are more and more separated from within themselves and each other, from with the ecology of the living web, this separation from nature and culture, human and the non-human. I feel it's, or at least for me, the research also through the arts and the energy of creation is really to find ways in which we can make sense of all this, and it cannot be separated from life. And when people speak about the politics of every day, this notion of, for me, it's really bringing this question to the center of what we do. And each of us may find different ways to embody this attempt of centering around life and defending life and reproducing life rather than reproducing death, because I feel the system in which we are living, which we may call it a capitalist system, which brings the burden of and has fed on colonial and racial patriarchal colonialism system. It's a necrosystem. It's a system that reproduces death. And certain bodies are more exposed than others with that. So for me, it's also a question of how we position ourselves, how we become aware of our privilege, on which wealth we build our exhibition. You know, is it enough to invite an African curator, an African artist to, you know, this question I wanted to also with you discuss, because you are often probably used in a tokenistic way. I've seen this happening in those institutions we are criticizing, and we are taking the courage of severing ourselves and our work from. But I've seen this, that more and more as this notion of decolonial, of repatriation, of reparation becomes appealing in this institution, there is tokenistic way to deal with this. So what it is that it's needed to really embody a decolonial process, or, you know, how not to stop on a just tokenistic, superficial way. How, also one of my questions is, as I had the privilege and the honor of sharing space and learning from other cosmovision, from non-Western paradigms. Right now in my research, I'm really trying to see how I can bridge and maybe use some of this learning without how do you say, appropriating, if is not a tradition I come from. But since these are learning that are somehow supporting life and the web of life, I'm questioning how my role in the culture world or in the garden, the space I can cultivate, how this notion can open up a different way of being, a different way of feeling, a different way of relating and producing knowledge. So I'm really curious to hear how those translations could be done. What's your...
Yeah, so actually, let me drink some water. There's an invitation, I think I wrote the bid to a conference for res artistes that's happening in London in September. And I proposed not a forum in this sense of the word, but like I asked for a comfortable room where myself and 5 other counterparts from the continent, and I tried to locate it that there was somebody from West Africa, East Africa, we would sit comfortably and would have written a series of provocations covering certain themes that I think are most urgent in articulating this theme of theirs that is creating residencies for everyone. And I said we'd sit in this format and a member of the audience would pull out a provocation. They would answer a question. I mean, they'd ask us a question and we'd discuss around that, and every other time would change the topic. That was my attempt at not presenting myself as the expert on behalf of an entire continent with very many nuances, because Africa is not a country, it's a continent. So this was my attempt at also just going, here are other voices in the room. There's a colleague from Ghana who runs a residency. They deal with particular challenges around their own identity as a trans woman within Ghana. Somebody else that I proposed was somebody in Tanzania from Nafasi Art Space, because they for me, they're one of the most vibrant examples of an organization that was born from having seen Greatmore Studios, but is doing interesting things that are specific to an Eastern African context. I proposed somebody from, what else did I propose? Oh, somebody from Nigeria, but in as far as I could, I made this thing, I invited other people into the room. And so what I usually say with, for example, like counterparts from elsewhere is to go, you invite the first of all, do have the people that you want to learn more about in the room, so that you are not theorizing about them amongst yourselves in abstract ways and in ways that are limited to your own contextual understanding. That's one. But also two, to kind of, it has to be backed up with teachability. Like, it has to translate to a something every time. It can't just be, we had a beautiful conversation, that was great, and now it's business as usual, because then that becomes tokenization. Hold yourself accountable to the idea that after this conversation, you did something to discomfort yourself, because I want to assume that the idea is allyship. You can't be an ally of something if you're not willing to lose some of your privileges and feel a certain level of discomfort, or use your resources to create discomfort for somebody who has not had it. I mean, this is something that I bring up all the time with my work around mobility justice of cultural workers, where now there's all these conversations that are emerging around an environmental sustainability in artist mobility. And the instinct that I could feel coming, particularly from the West, was this idea that everybody needed to count their miles and people needed to reduce their carbon footprint. And I've written an article which appears on the On the Move Cultural Mobility Yearbook, where I kind of challenge this idea, this simplistic understanding of what the environment is, first of all. It's certainly the plants and the fauna and the flora and the mountains, but it's also the people that make up the ecosystem. And as things stand, the people who make up the ecosystem exist from a playing field that is not leveled. And so what does mobility justice look like, as opposed to, what does environmental justice look like, as opposed to environmental, I don't know what it's called, environmental action.
Not to mention that if they really wanted to intervene, correcting and reversing and transitioning to more eco-centered way of living, would not be by stopping one artist to travel, but stopping the whole production system and traveling of merchandise that is much more
but also like
damaging.
This idea that I had to, like in one of the forums, I was like, what I'm not going to do here, I'm not going to sit here and tell you about all the sustainable ways that African artists have always been working. Because we just do, because we work with the resources that we have. But also, like, I live in a village. I go shopping once a month or twice a month. That means I'm not using a car. I wash out of a basin. So I don't know, you're going to measure me by this trip that I made here to make some euros so that I can go home and continue to build my residency. But what you're measuring is how many miles I traveled. The fact that, it just doesn't, the matrix does not add up. So when we speak and view it from a perspective of justice and solidarity, what does solidarity look like in this in this instance where, certain people have had certain things forever, and some people need to experience certain things for their self-actualization, but for livelihoods. And so what is the hierarchy of lives? What is most endangered? What are we doing here, actually? And also, there's one more point I wanted to make, which I think has escaped me. So in this idea of solidarity, like with me coming here, there was a point where it was touch and go. I might not have, are you signaling time? I think, yes. Yeah. Where like it looked like it wasn't going to happen because the visa, the application, the appointment was not popping. The proof of means, oh my God, you need to pay X amount of euros application fee, reason to return. Oh my God, I'm going to gateway to heaven. Europe is gateway to heaven. They need me to prove that I'll want to go home to my great-grandparents' hut where I have endless views, or whether I will disappear under the bed in the hotel room. And also, if my dream was to maybe live in Europe before we have colonialism, because people went and explored other things because they felt like wherever they were was not enough. And so that project has been ongoing. It's one-sided. Some passports have privilege more than others. So what's happening here? But what then happened in this process is that colleagues from the Prague Quadriennale and a colleague from Art Moves Africa intervene, taking steps that showed me what solidarity could look like from our colleagues from the Global North. Because something else that is prevalent is that they just go, oh, you couldn't get the visa. Oh, I'm so sorry. Find the next available African. Oh, so we are commodities. So you're not willing to walk this journey with me. Oh, it's uncomfortable. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. It's nice to know that you can replace one African for another and you keep it moving. So those kinds of things.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing, because it's, maybe here we all know how it takes, but often these are also aspects of our work as a culture producer, organizing, running spaces that are not so evident for an audience or for someone who comes to work. What it takes also to bring people, to make encounter possible, and what is needed. It's important also to hear that you appreciate when you found colleagues that got active on that. I was sharing, I had the same experience helping friends that are publishers in Palestine. It took a good 10 years of work, of back and forth with the embassy, with the Italian embassy, until finally they got the visa, And I knew I had to insist that much and maybe change the way I was communicating with the bureaucrat at the embassy, because these same people 3 times were refused to travel to Berlin to AKB, which is very important, the House of the Culture of the World, one of the most important German public institutions, which has that name. And 3 times in a 3-year project that we were both involved, they were refused. So I knew the moment I invited them to come to our Ecoversity gathering in the south of Italy, which is happening soon, I had to be implicated and engaged and make space in my work schedule to have that back and forth with the embassy working, you know. And it's, this is the responsibility and the care. No, this idea
And the solidarity.
And the solidarity, and this to me is what it means, like to be political. To again, the personal is political and the political is personal. There cannot be separation in the way we. And I could not work and you know, speak about my work being political work, being socially engaged artistic work, if I would not commit to this type of work, you know.
The discomfort part.
Yeah.
The willingness to be discomforted and to make visible your solidarity and felt.
Exactly, and understand and acknowledge that my mobility, that my privilege in being mobile, in not even sometimes understanding what it takes for other people to cross a border, and the anxiety and the time and the process. So it's very important to make this evident in the artistic organizational work, I think.
Yeah, just to share very quickly, like in this research that I'm doing with deconfining Europe around mobility, there's a survey that I designed and I put in a special section that asks about the feelings that people feel around the process, because a lot of the other questions were more kind of technical, you know, in terms of why you were refused and reinstated, But this particular one, the question was specifically, how does the process make you feel? And I gave a glossary of words, I think of about 20 words that people had to kind of pick. And they range from anxious, stressful, and, you know, scary and
Precarious,
you know, to necessary, to clear, to, and right there, stressful, anxiety-inducing, discriminatory, time-consuming. And for me, it was very important to move it from the head to here a bit, for all of our sakes, because the thing about systems is that, I think this is something that we spoke about now, is that you said it so beautifully, and you quoted Mahatma Gandhi, and you said, you know, intellect without heart. These conversations can happen at a very head level, and we forget that they are back to that human being and the ethic of care, like that there are human beings who are experiencing. You don't know what it's like to get off like a plane, and we shared this in Europe, to walk towards an immigration officer, because there's this possibility that you might have to repeat the same plane ride that you've just done to come to this side of the world, when somebody, for some whatever reason, decides, even though you might even have the visa already, that no. And you have to repeat the... And I don't know, like where I come from, visitors, it's welcome. Not beg me to come, and then even when you come, I might not open the door. Actually, I'll tell you to go back home. It's conception of hospitality. And
yeah, this is something we need to really work a lot in Europe.
And reciprocity.
Reciprocity and the gate, like opening the gate, undoing this this fortress and doing this Eurocentric idea that we need to protect our space as if that's a way, I don't know, to protect what after we went elsewhere and we continue to use resources, labor, ideas from somewhere else, but then everything has to stay inside and protected and not shared. It's it's definitely something that those who are positioned and situated here has to consider more, even when we participate in this culture exchange that our work, our profession allow us to build. I want to maybe propose, it's time, what you think. If we said you could have interrupted us, but you were polite enough to let us converse. Please, if you have any questions, or comments, and continue our thought and bring your personal experience about some of the maybe elements that we brought up in this conversation, or the pictures, if you have some curiosity of some of the images that we were sharing.
I will take the privilege of this. So just I am putting my curiosity towards you beautiful women as an artistic background. So I have been in Europe since 2 years, like living and finding my roots here. And very interestingly, like because of my wife, I got chance to travel in Slovakia, which exists beyond Bratislava, because so many times Slovakia is only Bratislava centric. Nobody knows what exists out of Bratislava. And one thing I really found as an institutionalization is like my part is like always to reclaim what we lost. Like I'm always in the journey of reclaiming. And the most amazing and sacred thing I found, very institutionalization, is dance. Like everywhere I go, like whether it's in India or in Slovakia, it was the most sacred thing for building the community. And I got chance to see one Slovak folk dance. It's very sacred, like lots of touch, lots of screaming. So I think, this is like the one thing we lost in India also. Like everything is institutionalization, like which is my deep core pain now, because the tool for connecting with each other or with community, it becomes so commercialization or so institutionalized, like everybody with beer and entertaining, and it's like completely lose their own sacredness and form. So how you think, and part of me as a capitalistic, I am so agree with it. You also, I have a two part of my side, because I come from the background of capitalism. So that part of me, it's like it's okay, like it can be very commercializing, merchandising. But as the notion of reclaiming those sacred dance or like a community process together, how you see that notions to reclaiming those, like on your own perspective?
Right now, like my biggest challenge to myself in thinking through anything is to resist the idea that everything, like things are only binaried, that it's either this or that. Right now, how I free myself from these two sides and how I live with my own contradictions, owing to this idea of like our innate selves and our socialized selves and the dominant ways in which like capitalism exists in our beings. I kind of try and say an ideal situation would be if those who are inclined to institutionalize have the means to do so, and everything else in between, up to the point where it's happening organically. And these things always happen organically. Excuse me, that's the thing about nature and the nature of things, is that nature insists on itself. These ways of moving our bodies that are so spiritual and communicative, these are innate in who we are as the different nations. And in most cases, you find the connections that kind of point us back to a human race. But these things refuse to die regardless. Nature is not passive. So even in dance form and dance formation, the nature of what dance is at a spiritual level is not passive. It refuses that. You know that when you hear certain beats and you are congregated under the right circumstances, there are certain things that happen that cannot be avoided, that cannot be regulated, that cannot be obliterated. They just exist in our being. So the short answer is that full spectrum. But what tends to happen is that the institution, again, back to power, wants to subjugate and swallow and regulate everything, and does not have a conception of this idea of making space for other iterations of this thing across the spectrum. So my ideal is that make space for many iterations of what the thing is. From dance to music to food to loving to yeah.
Yeah, it's about carving spaces. I feel this idea to open space brings the idea to carving space. Even when the space is not there, you make space. You try to make time and space, which goes together. And also your sense of saying reclaiming brings to me this idea that we can also not be always consumed by being against the existing mode of living, against capitalism, against the mechanism, but also, try to concentrate in what we are for or forward. So, use our time and energy and possibility, whatever material or immaterial knowledge system to share and make those space happening, even if they don't exist, or they don't exist yet, or they exist but they are suppressed. And I agree with this idea that things re-exist, resist. I love how our friends in Latin America, they say to resist is to re-exist, like to bring back to life something that maybe existed in a past, but that is still present, it's just not so visible. And in that, I think is also important to protect the opacity of something. Not everything has to be declared and given to the mainstream. And for me, I'm very aware of the spectacle, and I try to resist the spectacle and this constantly driven to performativity, because something has to be protected, and it's okay to leave it opaque and not to an easy access. And so carving those space also for protected processes, where the process is really just internal. It doesn't need to land on a magazine, on the TV, on the big important platform, but also in the art world. It doesn't have to be on e-flux to be validated and existing. It exists in our courtyard just for us, if this is transformational enough for some of us or all of us at different pace and different rhythm. So it's also this idea of learning how to let go of that validation, of that what we do is important, if it's not validated on the,
I don't know if there's anybody. I just wanted to jump on that, and with that is like the politics of value creation, like and who needs to witness it in order for it to exist. So one of the things that like I stopped doing for Great Mo Studios, for example, is that I just stopped the social media page. Because I was like, considering the amount of like nonsense that I've been put through, for me to now be putting every achievement, every milestone, it almost feels like I'm proving to somebody that this thing still has value when they have worked hard to diminish its value so that they could say, on your watch. So then I was like, I don't see why I should still be performing this idea of this for your relevance and your approval. But I also get the need to be seen, and these friends are winning.
As you're composting your... Yeah, this was
Beautiful.
the bio
Tell us.
toilet. Just because the need to be seen in this very intimate moment that we claimed to be also collective responsibility. This was when we built a dry toilet, eco toilet, with the community of farmers we work with, where we were at the end of our food inquiry and food process, of course, from food production, we had to arrive to how we compost food in our human body. And so this was the dry toilet where, human feces can nurture the soil.
And this needed to be witnessed.
Yes.
And that is legitimate and that is okay, because it was determined by the people involved that in this particular instance.
And learning, that was a very important learning moment.
Right. So in the moments that we keep for ourselves, and there are also moments that, because we have been invisibilized, there are moments that we'll claim for ourselves, where we go, see me, I'm here, witness me doing this thing right now. And again, it's not an either or, it's a negotiated space that should make sense for everyone involved.
Thank you. I just want to be aware of the time that was given to us. And I don't know, Judith, you want to have a closing? Someone else has a word for closing or question?
I was having a very long-term reflection that is ongoing within my head and between us, my comrades and myself, and it will lead us to another session of probably a couple of hours of discussion, because for me, what you are saying, power has this neutrality. It's whether you are taking it or you are giving up that is not neutral. And giving up sometimes is a gesture of power, of like, I am strong enough to give up here, because I have enough power to give up. But at the same time, when we feel powerless, those are the moments of danger when the power of violence will take this space over, and they will take it from us. So, like, this neutrality is a big question for me that we, with many people, are continuously reflecting upon. And in this moment of the war that is happening between power of Russia, that is losing right now all its powers, and powerless Ukraine that is powerful from within, that's one of those examples, but like, I don't want to put it only in the military kind of spaces. It's also at stake in the art world. Whether we take our powers and reclaim it, or we give up, or we're stateless and powerless.
Or we share it.
Or we redistribute the powers. Those are it's not even the question. It's for me the platform of my reflections for years and years. And I'm still in this questioning, but you were putting it in a particular way. Power is neutral.
Don't you have a number of a magazine where this topic of power is discussed by many artists? I read something as I
So, yeah, oh,
researching about.
so I curated a program called Power Talks. It was based on a research that the Goethe Institute was doing, reflecting on itself and its own relationship with the spaces that it occupies, I think particularly in South Africa. Then they thought to appoint curators in 4 regions in South Africa to investigate power within the sector. And the way that I curated this Power Talks, I kind of located it loosely in this area where Great Moore Studios is, which is between a place called Woodstock and there are other areas that get implicated into the space. And so I kind of went, I could go into this by talking to power that subjugates, and I think enough has been said on that, particularly in South Africa. But I wanted to know about the power that makes it possible for people, for entities, for ideas to exist in spite of power that seeks to subjugate, because that in itself is powerful. And so one of the things that I did was that I got this chef who is from Rwanda, who's also a Seventh-day Adventist, who cooks food that is vegan, but where she sources her ingredients as a migrant in South Africa, it showed me a network and a pathway of food movement from the rest of the African continent into South Africa in ways that were phenomenal. Because when you studied the food pathways, you began to realize, how the hell do you get a plant that only grows in Zambia into South Africa? Like, how do you pull it off? There's an entire importing industry network that exists that speaks to, and if you boil it down, it boils down to the fact that there are people who are displaced who just want to taste home. And somewhere, this thing has emerged where people get their taste of home in a very, on the surface, the situation is, the idea that these people are here, they're displaced, and South Africa is very hostile towards other Africans, by the way, as an aside. But these people have found this meaning for themselves. And also the history of Woodstock now as it's being, the way, some of the more topical things about that area is the fact that it's being gentrified. But in speaking about gentrification within Woodstock, you forget that there are all these other worlds that exist that don't get as much visibility. So I wanted to also pull the veil of the hyper-visible conversations and the most obvious places to go with this to kind of insert another layer. I also, for example, commissioned somebody to do a sonic sound of Woodstock. So I wanted to hear what this Woodstock that is surviving, that is living through gentrification, that has the fight between the Muslim call to prayer, the Hadhan, that other people are calling to be criminalized as noise pollution, and that tension, and the street culture that is emerging from that. And I said to this person, give me a sound of that. Skateboards, trains, the Hadhan, this article that is written by this academic on calling for monuments of the marginalized, talking about the erasure of LGBTIQ plus people in anything that relates to heritage and history. What else happened? Yeah, so there was a few interventions that I curated to speak to an idea of power that moves us away from this spectrum of power to another articulation of power. I know that my superpower is in, for example, is in being slow, deliberate. That is power, but in a world where somebody will have me believe that my power is not legitimate, that power comes from. So I'm not necessarily, so maybe what I am saying when I say power is neutral, I'm saying that contextually, every day negotiated, we have the power to decide in what ways we want to use the power that we have over any situation. And maybe the check-in point is, am I using my power in ways that are subjugating or in ways that are constructive, affirming, generative, iterative? Absolutely. Absolutely. Mm.
Thank you.
And thank you. Yeah.